based on this EPR, on environmental performance review, can decide whether to finance or whether to dedicate some part of the national budgets to those projects. Third part I wanted to mention is the high performance buildings initiative. Indeed, because as we know, buildings are responsible for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions due to the energy services they require. And we have our guidelines for high-performing buildings. Just today, we were close to Glasgow to opening and signing MOU, indeed 9 MOUs, but with the Innovation Centre here in Scotland. And one specific and new project that we are opening now is called an International Climate Initiative. We are implementing 24 millions on energy efficient buildings, but it is a whole complex of questions, but because building needs to be energy efficient, environmentally friendly, it should be managed by ITs, it should use some recyclable materials, so it's starting from the design through production, construction, up to the last phase, and it is a waste disposal. We have 2 more contributions from UNECE, exactly from our housing sector, on financing, on innovative financing and green or environmental agenda. First is Compendium of Practice on Innovative Financing. This is a compilation of a strong focus on climate smart cities. Just this morning we had excellent event. Maybe some of you have seen that, how to bring Agenda 2030 and also climate change agenda, Paris Agreement agenda to the level of the local governments and cities. So, and another is excellent 2021, so very recent publication named #Housing 2030. This is on effective policies for affordable housing in UNECE region, and it contains a dedicated special chapter on investment pathways and best practices to deliver affordable and inclusive housing. So it is about financing, it is about affordable, environmentally friendly and inclusive housing. Fourth area is delivering either nature-based or technological solutions for carbon capture, usage and storage. As we know, this is a big topic. We could speak another 3 hours and we discussed it today, whether to subsidize that. Definitely it's a way how to decarbonize the industry and the world around us. We develop related legal, financial, regulatory frameworks in collaboration with infrastructure and banking institutions. So it's really something what is worth to explore a little bit more, and how to finance that, whether to subsidize, what about the taxation on that and all those issues. So I'm very happy that all executive secretaries of all 5 regional commissions have joined the high-level dialogue that we had this year recently on energy at the General Assembly, now in September. So it was our joint contribution. Maybe last of the areas where we wouldn't maybe think about how it goes together with addressing the climate change financing, but it is statistics, you know, because we have another sub-program on statistics and measuring the implementation of SDGs, and in close cooperation with the Conference of European Statisticians, we are supporting our 56 member states in identifying information needs and measurement challenges related to climate change. So we had now in 2021 expert forum for producers and users of climate change related statistics, and we have very close ties with national statistical offices, and we speak with them about the challenges related to green finance. So green finance products must have mechanisms in place that assist in the selection of the projects, but even more importantly, the collection and verification of related performance information. Some information is the king here, because here environmental statistics and other indicators that may be collected as part of other reporting obligations are definitely the key. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is, I don't want to spend more time on and I'm open to any of your questions. If you have a follow-up questions, whatever information available with me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Undersecretary General, Ms. Executive Secretary. We are very pleased to hear about those experiences, which show the opportunities presented by linking together 56 countries, which again, each have their own priorities, but there is an opportunity there to have a regional approach. We're having a bit of connection issues with coming in from the second Executive Secretary, Dr. Vera Songwe from the Economic Commission from Africa. We will proceed therefore to the next live intervention, and when we get her connected in, we'll bring her on board. It's therefore my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Rola Dashti, who is the Undersecretary General and also the Executive Secretary of the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia in Beirut. Dr. Dashti.
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon and good evening to everyone. I just want to follow on what my friend Olga stated. We cover in the Economic Commission for West Asia, we cover the Arab states. We are 22 countries from Morocco to Yemen. Now today we'll be focusing on the climate financing and what is the region and ESCWA is doing and to support the member states. But let me give you some background on the region. The Arab region witnessed a historical rise in debt, reaching $1.4 trillion in 2020, and COVID-19 has worsened the situation further. In addition, we have an increase to mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic. The region needs around $400 billion to mitigate only the COVID-19, which made a pressure on the liquidity availability in the countries to mitigate COVID, let alone to finance climate actions. So external financing was extremely important for the region. However, at ESCWA, our recent study shows that out of the 13 countries, out of 22 countries, the Arab states need around $500 billion in climate finance. So we have a debt of $1.4 trillion. COVID-19 mitigation is more than $400 billion. And climate finance needs is about $500 billion. The region cannot afford it by itself. So with liquidity constraints and the high debt, we cannot continue with the existing financial schemes when it comes to climate finance. Currently, the region has loans 8.5 times more than grants. The region cannot sustain having loans more than grants. We need to reverse the situation. At the same time, when we look at climate financing in the region, we see the climate finance is targeted towards mitigation vis-a-vis adaptation in an amount of 3.5 times for mitigation than adaptation. And also, this cannot be continue as the priority for the region is on adaptation. 90% of the population in the region, we're talking about 390 million people, live in a water-stressed countries. So adaptation is a priority for the region, and we need to revisit the relocation of the climate finance. Giving this background, what are we doing as ESCWA to support the member states? ESCWA with the League of Arab States and UNFCCC are undertaking Arab Climate Finance Mobilization and Access Strategy 2022-2030. The strategy was discussed. There was a consultation convened by the UNFCCC, last League of Arab States, and ESCWA. And we reached a consultation as a consensus on the regional priorities for the region. And this consultation priorities was formulated in a strategy which has been discussed with the Council of Arab Ministers responsible for environment and its Arab group for climate negotiations. And this strategy will be shown during the first MENA Climate Week and Climate Mainstreaming and Investment Forum that will be held in Dubai in March 2022. So we have formulated the strategy, we have formulated the needs of them. Given that the strategy and the needs, ESCWA have initiated a climate SDG donor nexus initiative. And this is, we have launched this initiative in December 2020. This initiative expanded the traditional thinking of the debt swap with bringing into that element, the donor element to the debt swap. So we have another stakeholders in that initiative. It's not only the debtor and the creditor, the usual traditional, but we're bringing the donor community also to it. And the idea here is to swap countries, highly debted countries, to relieve them and burden of the debt payment, to swap this debt payments into climate projects and resilience projects that addresses SDGs and addresses the climate, and bringing this commitment of the governments by matching it with some donor community so to accelerate the project into it. Today, we have our pilot country, which is Jordan, is engaging in this debt initiative, and we have Egypt and Tunisia are also forthcoming in engaging in this initiative. A third thing that we have been doing is accelerating the adoption of a circular carbon economy framework that incorporates circular economy and green economy principles into nationally determined contributions. This includes focusing on hard-to-abate sectors and raises the interest in mitigation options such as storing or reusing carbon dioxide emissions or using biomass and renewable fossil fuel. The framework was developed with ESCWA support and presented by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia presidency during their presidency of the G20. A third initiative on the ground at the national level is what we have as a regional initiative to promote small-scale renewable energy applications in rural areas of the Arab region. We call this project Regent Project, which was launched starting from 2018, and we're continuing on it, and it's focus on in installing small-scale renewable energy applications in rural areas based on a business model that provides renewable energy access alongside training on green technologies and entrepreneurship to create green employment opportunities with particular focus on rural women. 24 initiatives have been launched in Jordan, Lebanon, and Tunisia by ESCWA with the support of our Swedish government. More than 500 families has been benefiting from this initiative and in improving their livelihood and in creating some opportunity for them. Region was featured in the United Nations High-Level Dialogue on Energy 2021 theme report on enabling SDG through inclusive and just energy transition, which highlighted its contribution towards energy for prosperity, renewable energy, gender equality, and education. It was also, this project was also identified as an SDG good practice, promoting SDG partnership on the water, energy, and food nexus through renewable energy access. I want to end, when we talk about climate finance and when we talk about climate actions by national countries, it cannot be solved by national countries by themselves. It's a collective effort and the collective actions that it needs. And financing needs to be done on a collective matter. There is a shared responsibility at the global level that needs to be acted together and to be focused and to be delivering the finances to the regional level and to the national level based on national needs and their nationally determined contribution. Otherwise, the financing will not be used optimally and will not resolve to solve the problems, the climate problems that it is. And finally, I want to tell you that our region is among the least contributor to climate problems, but we are the most affected by climate changes that is occurring. And financing is a key element to address climate actions and to create livelihood and support to our families. And with this, thank you very much for coming, and we'll be open to any discussions.
Good thing we're not wearing heels. Thank you very much, Dr. Dashti, and I'm showing that's a solidarity between countries to be able to move forward, and that moving forward we have to think about debt and positive responses. And both of you were mentioning the circular economy, which shows again even across regions there are similarities. And I'm sure we're going to hear about other similar regional initiatives that are shared amongst the regional commissions to help again respond to regional specificities, but perhaps with the same overall approach. I'm very pleased to say that we have Dr. Vera Sangwe online. I think we're going to be able to connect. Please, if for those in the audience, I'm glad you all have your mic. Dr. Sangwe is the Undersecretary General and Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. And I'm hoping, there we go. Lena, can you please pin her large? There we go. Dr. Dashti, would you like to maybe sit over here so they can see a little bit better? Dr. Sangwe, I think you can proceed if you can go ahead and present.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me, and I see Roller at least laughing and putting her hand up. I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you today. As you all know, I would have really loved to be with you, but I'm calling in from Ethiopia, and we have the secondary issues that are keeping us here. Hopefully all will be well. But let me start with Ethiopia and say that in Ethiopia, for example, we have a program called the Green Legacy Program, which essentially is a program about planting 5 billion trees over a period of 3 years. I think one of the conversations that we've had a lot of in the last few days in Glasgow has been about methane and methane gas, and we've seen all the pledges around reforestation. I think that will be when Glasgow is written and the story of COP26 is written, it will be about what we did with forests. And I think that's one of the things that we at the Economic Commission for Africa are doing, is essentially, and I think Rola mentioned some of that as well, is not only are we helping the government in its Green Legacy program to plant more trees, but we're doing a little bit more. We're looking at also how you can then transform this planting of trees into job creation opportunities for the youth, for conserving and protecting those trees, but also now looking at how we can do effective cooking stoves, which creates small businesses in those regions. And I'm still using the trees, and this is a little bit, what happens when one does something good for the environment. There are so many ripple effects. We are also using tree planting to ensure that rivers and streams continue to flow well by using stopping the silting around that. So we have a Green Legacy project that we're actually doing, and we hope we can do that for many more countries, because as you see, Jean-Paul is there in the room, and I'm assuming that James Murembedze is also in the room with you and the rest of the team that is doing this for us. But I think these are the kinds of initiatives that start quite small. It's just a tree. Then it leads to job creation, it leads to protecting the environment, it leads to women not cutting down trees, and 23 women, as we know, every year die from poor respiratory diseases because of cooking inappropriately. So I think that's one of the things that I think we have in common with the others that have spoken. Secondly, Rola has talked about climate finance and the need for financing. Like many of the developing world, we need additional financing. I think we've all gotten stuck in 100 billion from Paris, but we need a lot more now. Countries like Mozambique are spending about 11% of their GDP just responding to climate crisis. Of course, we have the whole Sahel that is responding. So climate finance is important. SDG bonds are something that are needed. We at the Economic Commission for Africa launched an initiative called the SDG 7. It's $1 billion initiative with PIMCO to finance green energy. We're very proud to say we had our first deal, $210 million with South Africa and the South Africa Energy agency, the Ministry of Finance and PIMCO, and we're hoping that we can do a lot more. We're working on the second deal in Senegal, and hopefully we'll have a third one in Mozambique. So these are things I believe we can actually crowd in private finance into renewable energy, into the renewable energy space. But one of the advocacy points that we're doing as we crowd in financing is gas. We have over 23 African countries that still depend on gas as a base energy. And we continue to say that Africa needs to have a transition, a just transition. And all African countries but 2 are committed to getting to net zero by 2050. However, we need to find some pathway that leads us to that. And we believe that having gas as one of our just transition fuels is going to be important. This requires financing again. And so looking at ways of mobilizing financing for gas is an important part of the conversation that we're having. I think that finally, nature-based solutions for improving and protecting our climate are particularly important. But Africa, as Arola was saying, we have the peatlands of the Congo, which sequester almost 30 billion tons of carbon. This is an immense amount of carbon that is sequestered. We believe that, and a lot of the conversations that you all are having in Glasgow in the last few days has been around Article 6, the price of carbon. There's a lot of conversation about getting funds, getting grants for emerging markets to respond to the climate crisis. But I think if we did and use some market mechanisms whereby there was a price on carbon, $50 per ton, you looked at then, some of the Congo Basin sequestration that is being done. If we began to monetize this, I think we will very quickly get the resources that are needed for Africa, both to do some mitigation but also some adaptation. So I think that we need to move away from just only looking for grant resources, a lot more market-based mechanisms, as Article 6 of the UN articles is asked for. In addition to that, and this is my final point, is transparency. We need to get a better sense of who is doing what, where, and how. Because again, there is a lot of conversation around, particularly in the private sector, pledges around the private sector reducing its carbon footprint, but it's not exactly clear, where it is happening, who is bearing the benefits. I think we had programs like the RED program that did not necessarily benefit the communities from which the carbon pricing and the carbon credits were being used. So I think if one can get a price for carbon, get better transparency on how we account for it, we will see, I think, an Africa in particular that can respond to this climate crisis much faster and get to 2050 with a zero net contribution. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, and thank you for connecting under these very difficult circumstances where you are and making that effort to be with us today. I hope you'll be able to stay on if there's anything else, but if not, we know that your director is here, Jean-Paul, who can answer any questions. So thank you very much, Dr. Sangwe, for joining, and to highlight also these issues about win-win solutions, about mitigation, adaptation, finding ways to create jobs and still achieve progress on the global goals. So thank you again very much, and we'll take on those recommendations as we move to the next region now. So we are pleased to have now, as we are from Glasgow, we're going to go from the west to the east. Our next regional commission intervention is by the Undersecretary for the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, Dr. Asina Barcena. She sent in a recorded message, if you would like, and again, you should be able to hear it correctly right now through the audio. Could you please proceed with playing the video? Thank you.
A pleasure to participate in this event organized by ESCWA on behalf of the 5 regional commissions. The last 30 years have been the hottest in temperature in the Latin American and Caribbean region, with the more acute cases located in those countries situated in the Caribbean and Central America. Actually, in Central America, more than 1 centigrade higher than the latter decade. This region is suffering a paradox. The region contributes with around 8% of the total GHG, emissions, to climate change, but at the same time, it's highly vulnerable to it. Some countries are already challenged with the current global warming. As reported by IPCC, 2020 was one of the 3 hottest years for Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. The glacial melting continues happening in Argentina and Chile, and the loss of ice cover has accelerated since 2010. The most intense drought in 60 years, affecting Amazonia and El Pantanal in South America, and 2020 overcame 2019 with wildfires in the southern Amazonia. The general drought in the whole region impacted navigation in the rivers, food production and harvest, posing additional risks to food security. It is forecasted that the average rain precipitation will change, and this will affect dramatically Central America, for example. In the oceans, the level of the ocean has increased in the last 3 decades, faster than in the subtropical Atlantic than the world average. The fact is that this continues to increase coastal flooding in the lower lands. Ocean acidification and rising sea level, ocean warming, and the increase in intensity and frequency of tropical storms is negatively impacting coastal ecosystems and human communities that are located precisely in the coastal areas. We need around 1.6 to 3.8 trillion annually to avoid global warming exceeding 1.5 degrees centigrade. Rich countries have long broken their 2019 Copenhagen pledge to mobilize 100 billion per year. It was already very modest, but, and they were supposed to give this money, 100 billion a year, precisely to address the needs of developing countries. And this situation has even been worse because of the pandemic, and available financing is being reduced. Small, low, and medium-sized economies are already trapped in debts and no fiscal space. So climate finance numbers that we have now available show clearly that finance or climate finance is not new or additional, as they include non-concessional commercial loans, rollover loans, and private financing. Some donor governments, including many that are today in Glasgow, count most development aid, even when it's not primarily dedicated to climate action. The small island development states desperately need to rebuild their resilience and adapt human environments and livelihoods. Adaptation funds are urgently required to better cope with the new circumstances created by global warming, compounded with the pandemics. Climate adaptation is rarely lucrative, and that's why there is less interest from the private investors. Rather, private investing or private finance favors mitigation, because it's the one that generates higher returns. So today, only $20 billion have been dedicated for adaptation, less than half the sum for mitigation. Only 3% has been allocated for adaptation. So there is, the UN, for example, estimates that developing countries currently need around $70 billion every year for adaptation, and this should rise to 120 to 300 billion every year. So adaptation is critical. It's critical particularly for the Caribbean in our region. And there is a big imbalance between adaptation and mitigation financing, because it's only 25% and not the 50-50 split that was promised and committed, at least 6 times higher for mitigation than for adaptation. So it is urgent to balance this ratio and invest more in infrastructure that is resilient. Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, suggested that at least $500 billion should be allocated and deployed via the special drawing rights every year. And this is a proposal that is floating today in Glasgow. And we at the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean are suggesting and proposing very concrete action. The first of it is a debt swap for climate action, particularly in the Caribbean. This proposal is linked to the establishment of a Caribbean Resilience Fund that could become a finance and an investment mechanism It's a special purpose financing vehicle intended to leverage long-term, low-cost development investments, both for adaptation and mitigation, and for the development of green and blue industries. In addition, ECLAC has developed a model for the big push for sustainability, which consists in reorienting public and private investments and increasing the public and private investment, which is today 17.6% of GDP, to 26.2% of GDP, which is the world average. So we are suggesting that these 17.6 plus 9 percentage points be dedicated for investments in 8 dynamic sectors that can create jobs, reduce emissions, and foster growth. Energy transition to renewables is one, electromobility for the larger cities in the region, circular economy at the industrial levels, vaccine and pharmaceutical manufacturing in the region, solutions based in nature, for example, recovering and restoration of mangroves and reforestation, sustainable tourism, among others. And we are calculating the cost, the annual investment needed in each one of these sectors. We also propose to green the financial system with innovative mechanisms and instruments such as hurricane clauses, GDP clauses, and SDG bonds. And of course, to intervene in fiscal policies needed to translate climate impact into decisions, for example, to establish a carbon price that could be fair and just, and not only to discriminate against developing countries or put any more obstacles to their trading systems. And of course, to put together the right incentives and tributes to ensure the greening of the economy. We stand ready in ECLAC as a partner for all of those facing the most important challenge of our time and our generation. With our historical perspective and with the Latin American and Caribbean people, we put equality at the very center. Welfare, social welfare is our priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're very pleased to have that intervention coming in from Santiago, representing the 4th region that we have with us today. Let me introduce.
Is at a crossroads.
Can you just hold on? Okay, let me please introduce our final intervention from Dr. Armida Alice-Gabana. She is the Undersecretary General and the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Again, coming and recording, giving the time difference. Please run the video.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, the Asia region is at a crossroads in its development pathway. The severe and increasing frequency of climate change-induced natural disasters affects development gains in Asian and Pacific countries. The region is also a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emission. 7 of the G20 members from Asia are responsible for over half of global greenhouse gas emissions. Additionally, 5 of the top 10 countries with the greatest historical responsibility for emissions since the beginning of the 20th century are from the Asia-Pacific region. The region is already economically challenged in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, with 89 million people estimated to have been pushed back into extreme poverty. The disproportionate impact on the poor and vulnerable groups have exacerbated rising economic inequalities, both within and across countries. These disparities will be further compounded by the effects of climate change. We need to urgently increase the ambition of their nationally determined contribution, or NDCs, to effectively contribute to the 45% reduction of greenhouse gas emission by 2030 from the levels of 2010. We also need to align the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic with NDC targets and commitments supported by long-term low-emission development strategies. In this context, ESCAP has partnered with the Global Green Growth Institute, or GGGI, to define the green and climate finance options to support post-COVID-19 pandemic recovery aligned with more ambitious NDCs. In order to support a deep transformation of the financing and investment systems, the Asia-Pacific region needs to develop and apply more innovative financial mechanisms, including thematic bonds, debt for climate swap, and blended finance that will support a greening of the economy and decarbonization of production and consumption, as well as more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development. This mechanism can be supported by a recently established consultative group on financing strategies for the SDGs, which aims to facilitate dialogue and knowledge sharing between the ESCAP Secretariat and its member states. Additionally, alternative innovative financing instruments, such as debt for climate swaps, have the potential to help simultaneously tackle challenges related to insufficient financial flows for climate action and debt sustainability, while increasing investment in nature-based solutions with its enormous mitigation and adaptation potentials. However, facilitating such a swap is complex. ESCAP is currently working with the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat to analyze and identify the fundamental characteristic of a successfully negotiated debt swap. Governments cannot achieve their climate goals alone without engaging the private sector. ESCAP has a long-standing partnership with the private sector. The ESCAP Sustainable Business Network is crafting an Asia-Pacific Green Deal as they pursue a green competitive advantage and respond to increasing shareholder and consumer pressure for science-based targets that align businesses with climate aspirations. Distinguished participants, putting a price on carbon and applying carbon pricing instruments to generate revenues combined with fossil fuel subsidy reform will create a fiscal space that can support a shift towards low carbon and no carbon energy sources. Allow me to share a few of ESCAP's initiatives in this regard. ESCAP is partnering with UNFCCC and other development partners, including ADB and the Green Fiscal Policy Network, to promote the application of carbon pricing instruments in the Asia-Pacific region. Additionally, ESCAP has also developed a carbon pricing simulation tool to support policymakers in designing the optimal carbon pricing greenhouse gas emission reduction scenarios according to national circumstances. ESCAP will continue working together with UN organizations and regional development partners to support the achievement of low-carbon development strategies backed by more ambitious NDC commitments and increase investment in a greener future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. So that takes us around the world through the 5 regions. And what we are hearing, there are some similarities, again, on interventions that we are doing in terms of circular economy, debt for climate swaps, other measures to think about food security, employment, and all the other instruments to empower communities and regions to engage in the global goals. Before turning to our final speaker who will give the closing remarks from New York, right in the middle of the world, I just wanted to share with everyone that after the closing remarks, we will be showcasing a 5-minute video that the Executive Secretaries delivered during the high-level thematic debate on delivering for climate action to the People, Planet and Prosperity event hosted by the Presidency of the General Assembly just 2 weeks ago. The Executive Secretaries came together and delivered that. We'll have that run afterwards in case anyone has any questions here to ask with those here. Please, for those online, please enjoy that. It's a 5-minute video if you'd like to hear a little bit more about the initiatives going on across the world, across the 5 regions. So with that, I'm honored to turn to our final presenter giving our closing remarks, Dr. Rosa Malango, who is Director of the Regional Commission's New York office, coming into us to close us up today. Please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to colleagues in Glasgow. Good morning to colleagues over here, and good evening to colleagues where it is the evening. Excellency, distinguished Executive Secretaries, youth leaders, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to deliver the closing remarks and wrap up this important conversation on the margins of COP26. I would like to begin by expressing our gratitude to the Executive Secretaries of the 5 UN Regional Commissions for their powerful messages, the wealth of ideas, and the proposals presented today. I wish to reiterate on behalf of the Regional Commissions and my own behalf, our deep appreciation to all those following this important event today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard about promising partnerships emerging in the regions around the world to bridge the gap between current and required financing to achieve the 1.5 degrees target. We've also heard about tackling historic weaknesses and gaps and the urgent need to align the global financial system with climate agenda and more broadly with the SDGs. In addition to the powerful statements made by the Executive Secretaries today, we would like to take a moment to highlight some of the diverse voices and the bold proposals coming from the various regions which we have heard from Glasgow. Allow me to share a few examples. From ECLAC, that is covered by ECLAC, the Right Honorable Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, first female Prime Minister of Barbados, who pointedly declared that the sword that can cut the Gordian knot of climate change is an annual increase in SDRs of $500 billion a year for 20 years, putting it into a trust to finance the energy, food, and transport transitions required, and who reminded every single one of us that it would only be 2% of the $25 trillion mobilized by the central banks of the wealthiest countries in the last 13 years. To the youth voices who met with the Secretary General 2 days ago, we've all read their compelling letter from all of them calling for clear measures to stop the climate change betrayal, including the end to all fossil fuel investments, subsidies, and new projects, and their call on the wealthiest countries to deliver the 100 billion promise to the most vulnerable countries, as well as additional funding for climate disasters. To ECA, we heard from His Excellency George Manewea, President of Liberia, who proposed the establishment of an African carbon credit mechanism to address the inherent imbalance in the current architecture of climate financing. We can no longer continue to have a system in which countries that maintain and protect the largest remaining tracts of forest reserves are the ones with the lowest benefits from the current financial ecosystem. To UNECE, the Mayor Khan of London, incoming chair of the C40 Cities Network, who has announced the expansion of the C40's Global Green New Deal program, will direct the additional funding going to increase the number of cities in the Global South. ESCAP, while we understand there were some restrictions from those who could participate, we heard loudly the voice of the Samoan climate activist, Brianna Frionan, calling for ambitious action. And we have witnessed leadership by Southeastern Asian countries like Vietnam and Thailand, who committed to net zero emissions, as well as calls for national and regional action to be matched by green financing. And last but not least, ESCWA. We are encouraged by the recent announcement by the United Arab Emirates as the first Gulf country to commit to net zero emissions by 2050, as well as their financial and technology commitments under the Glasgow Breakthroughs and the support to accelerate innovation in sustainable agriculture. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude and end, allow me to join the UN General Assembly 76th President, His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, to conclude our event on a note of hope. It is my hope that this event has given you a reinvigorated sense of purpose to embrace global cooperation and build on the initiative raised by the voices from the different regions you have heard today. As my boss, the UN Secretary General, said in his opening statement at this COP, we echo his call for you to choose ambition, to choose solidarity, to choose to safeguard our future and our humanity. It is our hope that those leaders gathered in Glasgow and all of you following from around the world will rise to the occasion to face up to the current climate emergency and take urgent, bold actions. I wish to echo Elizabeth Wathuti, the Kenyan youth activist leader of the Green Generation Initiative, who told the world leaders in Glasgow yesterday, my story will only move you if you can open up your hearts. It is my hope and my prayer that we have opened up your hearts and you are ready to adhere to Nelson Mandela's words, who once said, it always seems impossible until it is done. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Rosa. Thank you all for participating in this event. On behalf of ESCWA, as the regional convener of the regional commissions, at this time around, we close the event. Thank you very much. We are here to ask a question, and we'll play the video. Goodbye and good night from Glasgow.
Climate resilience is a development imperative for Africa. African countries today spend anywhere between 5 to 11% of their GDP responding to the impacts of climate change. The Economic Commission for Africa is supporting this climate resilience agenda by pursuing a Green African Continental Free Trade Area agreement to tackle rising debt levels, which have gone from 47% before the crisis to today 66%, associated with the impact of the pandemic and economic contraction. ECA is also building capacity for debt for adaptation swaps in African countries. We have also prioritized the upscaling of private sector investment in sustainable energy through our SDG 7 initiative. We are looking to unlock further private sector investment through a liquidity and sustainability facility that will help crowd in better market financing for Africa's green bonds. Today, Africa's green bonds do not fetch the same premiums as other continents' bonds. A global price on carbon is a priority for African countries to be able to properly leverage their rich natural heritage, particularly the Congo Basin and the pitlands, to raise financing for investment in their development.
The pandemic has exposed and deepened global asymmetries related to financing for development and fiscal space. In Latin America and the Caribbean, climate change is another expression of these asymmetries, as the region contributes only with 8.3% of global emissions, but is highly vulnerable to its physical and socioeconomic impacts. ECLAC advocates for innovative financing instruments to increase climate resilience, including hurricane clauses, debt for climate swaps, and a Caribbean Resilience Fund, particularly for the Caribbean. Redistributing liquidity to developing countries by recycling recently allocated SDRs towards a trust fund for middle-income countries, or supporting Costa Rica's FACE multilateral fund are other initiatives to promote a climate-resilient recovery.
Sovereign debt levels in the Asia-Pacific region have risen sharply. The constrained fiscal space is impeding efforts to support sustained economic recovery, effectively pursue SDGs, and implement meaningful climate action. To address such concerns, ESCAP is working with the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat to understand the feasibility of debt for climate swaps in the context of Pacific small island developing states. Putting a price on carbon and applying carbon pricing instruments will create liquidity to drive economic activity up and support a shift towards low carbon and no carbon energy sources. ESCAP has developed a user-friendly carbon pricing simulation tool supporting policymakers to design a range of national and regional climate policy scenarios.
To address the climate emergency, UNECE helps countries to mobilize climate finance. UNECE partners with international financial institutions to integrate the principles of public participation and environmental impact assessments in their climate-related investment projects in the region. UNECE helps governments to prioritize financing for climate goals through the recommendations made in environmental performance reviews. This is supporting countries' policy shifts towards climate-smart blending and upscaling domestic green finance. As part of its high-performance buildings initiative, UNECE helps create financing mechanisms to support the deployment of energy and resource-efficient approaches in the building value chain.
The Arab region continues to receive significantly more debt financing than grants for climate action, and 3.5 times more support for mitigation than adaptation, despite being a water-scarce region. ESCWA is working with the League of Arab States and UNFCCC to prepare an Arab climate finance mobilization and access strategy, and launched the Climate SDG Debt Swap Donor Nexus Initiative to support middle-income countries with high debt burdens. The aim is to secure additional climate and SDG finance to support inclusive recovery and resilient livelihoods, to shift towards just transition with renewable energy and circular economy pathways, and address water, food, and climate security threats.
Climate resilience is a development imperative for Africa. African countries today spend anywhere between 5 to 11% of their GDP responding to the impacts of climate change. The Economic Commission for Africa is supporting this climate resilience agenda by pursuing a Green African Continental Free Trade Area agreement to tackle rising debt levels, which have gone from 47% before the crisis to today 66%, associated with the impact of the pandemic and economic contraction. ECA is also building capacity for debt for adaptation swaps in African countries. We have also prioritized the upscaling of private sector investment in sustainable energy through our SDG 7 initiative. We are looking to unlock further private sector investment through a liquidity and sustainability facility that will help crowd in better market financing for Africa's green bonds. Today, Africa's green bonds do not fetch the same premiums as other continents' bonds. A global price on carbon is a priority for African countries to be able to properly leverage their rich natural heritage, particularly the Congo Basin and the pitlands, to raise financing for investment in their development.
The pandemic has exposed and deepened global asymmetries related to financing for development and fiscal space. In Latin America and the Caribbean, climate change is another expression of these asymmetries, as the region contributes only with 8.3% of global emissions, but is highly vulnerable to its physical and socioeconomic impacts. ECLAC advocates for innovative financing instruments to increase climate resilience, including hurricane clauses, debt for climate swaps, and a Caribbean Resilience Fund, particularly for the Caribbean. Redistributing liquidity to developing countries by recycling recently allocated SDRs towards a trust fund for middle-income countries, or supporting Costa Rica's FACE multilateral fund are other initiatives to promote a climate-resilient recovery.
Sovereign debt levels in the Asia-Pacific region have risen sharply. The constrained fiscal space is impeding efforts to support sustained economic recovery, effectively pursue SDGs, and implement meaningful climate action. To address such concerns, ESCAP is working with the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat to understand the feasibility of debt for climate swaps in the context of Pacific small island developing states. Putting a price on carbon and applying carbon pricing instruments will create liquidity to drive economic activity up and support a shift towards low carbon and no carbon energy sources. ESCAP has developed a user-friendly carbon pricing simulation tool supporting policymakers to design a range of national and regional climate policy scenarios.
To address the climate emergency, UNECE helps countries to mobilize climate finance. UNECE partners with international financial institutions to integrate the principles of public participation and environmental impact assessments in their climate-related investment projects in the region. UNECE helps governments to prioritize financing for climate goals through the recommendations made in environmental performance reviews. This is supporting countries' policy shifts towards climate-smart blending and upscaling domestic green finance. As part of its high-performance buildings initiative, UNECE helps create financing mechanisms to support the deployment of energy and resource-efficient approaches in the building value chain.
The Arab region continues to receive significantly more debt financing than grants for climate action, and 3.5 times more support for mitigation than adaptation, despite being a water-scarce region. ESCWA is working with the League of Arab States and UNFCCC to prepare an Arab climate finance mobilization and access strategy, and launched the Climate SDG Debt Swap Donor Nexus Initiative to support middle-income countries with high debt burdens. The aim is to secure additional climate and SDG finance to support inclusive recovery and resilient livelihoods, to shift towards just transition with renewable energy and circular economy pathways, and address water, food, and climate security threats.
We would have. I hope you were taking some with them. I'm seeing us leaking.